if there's anything that I pride myself on as a coach is that I am a teacher. And I take that role very seriously. So a lot of you guys probably teach full-time in schools as well as coaching. So you're doing double time as a teacher. If you got kids, you're teaching at home every single day. But I take that role very, very seriously at Duke. The first thing, and this is not going to be the topic of this lecture, but I would be remiss if I did not mention it on here. The first thing that we are charged to do as teachers is to develop young men. And I think Coach Cutcliffe's way, which you see what he would say on here, is teaching winning as a value. I think that way of developing men and teaching our guys is really, really important. And that's why I wanted to start with that today. So we can use the example below that of, let's say we're teaching finishing, right? So we're teaching a football player to finish through a cone or to finish through a line, right? What is the short-term result of that? Is, okay, they're a better finisher as a tackler. They're better at finishing blocks. In the fourth quarter, your team, right? So individually, they're getting better. Your team is becoming better finishers. That's the short-term result of that. The long-term, right, is they're a better finisher in their job. They're a better finisher for their family or in their faith. And I think that is huge in us developing. So Coach Cutcliffe's philosophy is winning is an all-the-time thing, right? But how we teach it is as a value for them. So it's not just a short-term process, but a long-term process. And I think that example of finishing is one thing that's important, obviously, in our program and for every individual in their life. Today's focus, though, is not going to be about how we develop men, right? It's going to be our subject of football and how we do things from that standpoint. So the first component is going to be culture, okay? Most culture talks that I've ever gone to in my life, I've been at Duke for the last 8 years, this is my 9th year here. I was at Lenore-Ryan University, a Division II school in Hickory, North Carolina before that. Most lectures and clinics I've gone to are head coaches talking about culture, right? Because that's where it starts, is with your head coach, or if you are a head coach, right? You're the guy who says, okay, here's what we're going to be. I think that that's a fallacy. That's the only place that exists, though, right? So if you're a coordinator on offense or defense or special teams, I think that you take the head coach's culture and then that feeds down into the culture that you create on your side of the football. No different than if you're a position coach. David Cutcliffe, if he was talking in here right now, he would say, as a position coach, you're the head coach of your position. Well, that means that you better have a culture established for that position group, whether it's defensive line, offensive line, quarterbacks, whatever it is. Mine happens to be safeties at Duke. I think you have to take that role very seriously. Culture to me is not what you do, but how you do things in your program, right? So some of us are offensive guys on here, defensive guys on here. Some of us are 4 down, right? Odd fronts, even fronts, different things like that. Man coverage, zone coverage. All those are pretty sound schemes, right? But the most important thing is how you are doing those things, right? Not what you are doing. The second phase of this talk is going to be our effective teaching methods at Duke, okay? So here's one of my big philosophies, is to meet them where they're at to get them where you want them to be. So you got to meet your players where they're at to get to the end result, right? So none of those guys are ready-made. When they're 18 years old coming into our program, they're not ready-made as All-Americans probably. They're not ready-made as Duke University students yet, right? So we need to meet those guys where they are to then accomplish the end goal. So I'll use an example of texting versus talking. I'm probably not the only guy in here, right, that is coaching a guy that's a better texter than he is a talker, okay? So let's use the example of recruiting for right now. Let's say I want, by the time a guy comes to Duke University, that he can articulate in front of the room, that he can make 3x1 checks as a safety, that he's savvy, those types of things. That's not going to happen day one, right? It starts with what? An individual text message to that individual. And then from there, we build relationships, right? And we continue to grow every single day together to get them where we want them to be. So I think that's one little example, but I think that's critically important to our effective teaching process. Chip Kelly's name is on here. He's a great relationship with Coach Cut. When he was transitioning back to college football from the NFL, he spent some time with us at Duke. And I think it was a really influential time for us as a defensive staff, just hearing him and some of his philosophy. So one of the things that he did when he was with the Eagles, and this is well documented if you read about this at all or have interest in this after we've, go through some of this, he gets with the Eagles and he says, okay, here's the reality of the NFL. If you win, you draft last. If you lose, you draft first, right? They've created this essentially even playing field across the board. And that's why it's such an amazing league in the NFL. In college football, you have, different recruiting levels. You have different ways to try to get an advantage. He felt like there wasn't a way to get an advantage from a time or recruiting, things like that in the National Football League. So his philosophy was, we can become the best, most efficient teachers. So he hired a teaching firm to come in and sit in his position coaches and coordinators meetings and critique them on how they taught. So we took some of those philosophies of, okay, hey, some guys, right, they can hear you say it and they know it. Some guys can see it in a playbook and they know it, or see someone else do it on film and they know it. Or most guys, right, have to do it, right, fail at it at some aspect and then watch a corrective tape on film. But how do we try to make sure that no one gets left behind by touching on every single way that guys learn? So his influence is definitely part of this talk as well.